Well, hey everybody. This will definitely be our most candid and genuine conversation video to date.
What's candid mean?
Candid means just acting normal and not, I wouldn't say that we're unprepared, but I will say most of this will be off the dome. I guess you could say unprepared.
But
I feel very prepared for this conversation.
Or we could rely completely on the Holy Spirit for the next few moments.
Yes,
That's
Lord.
a
See
great
that
answer.
juke right there? See that juke? Ah!
It's great.
Way to be spiritual.
I am a pastor.
So what are we talking about today, Kaylee?
So today I thought it would be a good idea for us to take some time and talk about what it means to really own your faith. So you've probably heard us say around 9/12 that during these high school years, we want to see you guys go from renting your faith to owning your faith and realizing that, for a lot of you, you have learned things from your parents and maybe been raised in a certain way with certain values, but like the time's going to come when that is tested and that is kind of challenged as far as what do you actually believe, like not just what do the people around you believe, not just like what do you hear people say, but like what do you actually believe. So I thought it'd be a good idea for us to talk about how to really own your faith, especially in this season where like we're not meeting together physically, and the church is a huge part of that, but because we can't be together, what does that look like in this season? So I don't know, what do you guys think? What ideas come to your mind when I say those things?
I'm thinking back to when I was growing up. We didn't go to church until I was either 7 or 8, and obviously at that point my parents made us go. I didn't really have a choice, and I didn't hate it at all, but like at that time I was taking drum lessons. We started, like, me and my older brother, we started playing in the church band, and I guess it was probably around high school when my parents, I guess they sort of said, you don't have to go to church unless you want to. I don't really remember that conversation though, but it was definitely like during high school when I decided to own my faith. And frankly, like playing music in church is one thing that kept me going.
Sure.
And for a lot of us, and definitely for some of our high school students now, like sometimes Jesus isn't the thing that keeps us going to church at times. I'm not saying that's a great thing, but
Sure.
That's just reality for some people. And so I started owning my faith when I started like actually really diving into the Bible myself and figuring out what do these things mean. I guess I knew stories from Sunday school and whatnot, but like mine was probably, I think me owning my faith was deciding that I wanted to go to church on my own and serving on my own and reading the Bible on my own.
So I think what I hear you saying is like you went from like that moment or that season where you asked God into your life to saying like that's not just one decision, it's something that I'm going to choose to do regularly. So you did a couple things you just mentioned, like you started serving, you started attending church on your own. I don't know. Those are really great steps.
Well, and that's a great way to put it. Like I was saved when I was like 9, and then I got baptized right after that. But just as anything else, just as in a normal relationship, whatever, I decide to follow every day, and I took steps along the way. So that's a great way to say it.
It's good. I think for me, like I try to look at this question like a different way now. Like I like to look back, like what could have been different, what should have been different, what would have been different. And I think there's a statistic out now, and I don't really know where it comes from. I don't know how you could track it, but the 3 companies that I know have talked about it, like they have pretty similar data results, so it feels like it's pretty legit, that says like 85% of people who come to faith never take another step after salvation. Like they get saved, they get baptized, and that's enough. Like they get the get out of jail, get out of hell free ticket punched, and that's enough Jesus for me. And to me, looking back, like, yeah, that's great. Like to know you have security eternally to not go to hell, terrific. We're excited about that. Like that's great. But I think Jesus calls us to live a life more abundantly. Like Jesus calls us to live in his greatness. And if we're content with, I have enough Jesus for now, like no matter how old we are, once we get to that point where we think, I've got enough Jesus and I don't need anymore. I've got enough godly wisdom and I've got people I can call if I get in a bind, but I don't need anymore. Like we're not walking in his grace, and we're not walking in his victory, and we're not walking in his power. So for me, like, this is a great time of your life as a teenager to start habits that are going to help you continue to grow. Like, I think we would all agree you never arrive in your faith.
No.
Oh yeah.
You never get to a place where you're like, I've finally crossed the finish line. I've got enough of everything.
Right.
That's not the case.
Yeah.
So I think like this is a pivotal time to start some habits and some disciplines and some practices that will project your faith. Like, and this isn't like a comparison where like I'm so much farther along in my faith than someone else. That's not what it's for.
Sure.
But it's walking in that goodness and greatness of Jesus every day.
And part of the reason I don't think you can ever like arrive in your faith is because things continue to happen in our lives. Like where I was as a teenager and having a strong faith even in high school prepared me for some of the things that I would go through as an adult. Because until the things I went through as an adult, like my life was pretty easy. My faith was strong and I think rooted really solid. And that paved the way for me to be able to get through the things as an adult that were harder. And so I don't think you ever arrive because life just continues to change and you continue to have experiences that challenge you and are difficult.
Well, and I think there's so many different ways we can look at continual growth. Like we can think of continual growth in relationship with God in one way, and maybe look at continual growth in like biblical knowledge in another way. You know, like one thing that most people will agree on when it comes to a lot of different types of knowledge is the more I learn about the Bible, the more I realize that I have more to learn. You know what I mean? Like, or even the more I realize that it's impossible to understand everything, you know?
So what do you think? I mean, I think we all know lots of different ways to like own your faith, but is there a process of that? How do we help people really understand what owning their faith looks like?
So I think for me, I think there's a disclaimer involved. Like
Okay.
I think if we're not careful, we turn this into a checklist and a punch box of things like this is what we're supposed to do. And
Absolutely.
it's ironic to me, like when Jesus would say like all the explanations and definitions of things he said in the Bible, when he defined a disciple, someone that follows him, he says, one time he says, this is how people will know you're my disciple, if you love one another.
Love. Yep.
Sure.
It's not by how many Bible verses you memorized, how many church services you attend, it's how many spiritual boxes you checked off.
Right.
So I think it's important to understand, like, this isn't what this is about. This isn't like, hey, I've got a whole to-do list, and when I to-do all these, like, my faith is going to grow automatically. That's not what it's about at all. But it's understanding, like, as we do grow in this, I think there are some important steps we can take. And I think no matter where you are in your faith, whether you grew up in church or whether you
Right.
just recently came to faith, like, I think there's some important steps that we take now as young people that are going to help you guys to continue to grow the rest of your life.
That's really good.
One thing that's really helpful for me is sort of, I always have to be looking within myself and trying to realize like what season of life I'm in, I guess, like, because I'm not a super structured person, so I'm not like, I read through the whole Bible this year, sweet, I did my thing, whereas I always have maybe 3 or so like not struggles, but things I'm learning about in my life. So right now I'm learning about like the power of prayer and what it means and how I pray. And you know, like that's how I'm growing in relationship with God, and I'm learning more through the Bible about those things. So for me, like, is it a super concrete step of here's my next step with Christ is figuring out how to pray? I mean, it's just so vague that I know that I'm growing, but I'm not necessarily taking a super concrete step in that. And I think that's for everyone to understand. Like, sometimes you're taking steps, but it's not the most concrete thing in the world, you know? And oftentimes it's not a checklist, but oftentimes if someone were to say, hey, help me take my next step with God, like we have answers for that. And sometimes they're exactly what you need to hear. And sometimes you need to find something else out on your own too. And you need to learn yourself, like, here's how I can grow.
Well, and it's crazy how the Bible does that same thing too. Like there are times when you go to the Bible to look for instruction and direction, and it gives you like a pinpointed, like, do this.
Do this, yeah.
And there's sometimes where you go to Scripture for answers and for wisdom, and it's like,
It's a parable.
yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's exactly. Jesus
Interpret
gives
all of this
illustration.
and figure it out.
Yes, and that's a cool part of your growth too. Is it like, you know, I love to hear people ask questions because that means we're wrestling with how do I do this different? How do I think different? How do I change this? What needs to be different about me? And the wrestle, I think, is a lot of times where the growth is.
I agree. So I think, like, too, when it comes to owning your faith, it's realizing that if I really want something to happen, if I really want to see something in my life, then I need to make purposeful effort towards that.
Yeah.
I've been reading a book lately, and it's not like you've never heard it before, but it was like nothing changes if you don't change anything.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you want to really own your faith and you want to take, kind of like what Dave's saying, like your next step in your faith, I think it takes some purposeful effort in order to make that happen. And I think there's lots of different ways that that can happen. One for me that I think is a big deal is just like choosing to engage in things that you know are going to push you, or going to challenge you, are going to make you think, are going to put you in circles with people who maybe know more than you, or like are going to push you in different ways. And
good.
I think in this season that can be really difficult because we're not meeting together. So like, how do I continue to push and grow? And one of the ways that we've set up is through our small groups. We realize that you can't be together physically, but you can still have a discussion and pray together and talk about life. And I think we have these fancy devices that are basically like computers that can connect us to anyone in the world, and yet we get so stuck watching our Netflix show or getting trapped in the Hulu vortex of whatever else we can find, and we can waste so much time. But like, I think it takes intentional effort.
Yeah.
And Dave mentioned it too. I think this is a time, like for most of us, I don't know what your house is like, but my house is completely unstructured from what it normally is. Like, we used to have a pretty good target for bedtime. That's out the window. Like, sometimes we start a movie after bedtime at this point. Like,
Yep.
I mean, this, sleeping in is a whole new term. Like, if you guys had to go back to school next week and get up at 6 o'clock again, it's over. Like,
I would
it's
struggle too.
Meltdown city.
Yes.
But that being said, like, if you're ready to take steps in your faith, like, some of the best ways to get started in those disciplines are a little bit of structure.
Right.
Whether that's, recognizing, hey, I'd like to get, more serious or take a step in my prayer life. Like, I don't pray often, I don't pray much, or maybe I do, but I want to pray more. Maybe it's as simple as setting a reminder in your phone. Like, every day at 6 o'clock, I'm going to pause what I'm doing, and I'm just going to spend, 5 minutes with God, 10 minutes with God, whatever that is. Or I'm going to set a reminder in my phone. Hey, you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, and then you read your Bible, your devotions. Setting some structures in place to help you create those habits. Like, whether it's Bible reading, whether it's checking in on friends, whether it's serving others, just simple steps of structure can really help you create habits that are healthy to grow.
And just like you said at the beginning, the framework for all of that is not one of like guilt to have to do something to check it off the list, to say, oh, I did that today, that's done, I can move on with the rest of my day. The framework for that, and kind of like the lens, the perspective that we have to see it through, is like, no, these are purposeful things I'm doing to help me grow in my faith, not I'm going to check this off and I'm going to be such a good Christian and everyone's going to know that I read my Bible today, and oh, I prayed for you to, like, it's not the checklist thing, it's with the intent of growing in your faith.
It's good.
I really like what you said earlier, Kaylee, about putting yourself in positions where you're going to grow, even if it's uncomfortable. For me, this definitely looks different for some people, but I am an external processor, so I need to talk about things to learn how I feel about them. So I even have specific relationships that I know, like Ben Waterman. I can talk to him about deep faith things or things that are going on in my life, and he will, without judgment, he'll understand and listen, and oftentimes give me some advice, or give me there are times when he'll walk up to me and just say, like, Dave, I want you to think about this question. And that's a little bit weird in a normal conversation, I guess.
Sure.
But it's something that Ben and I have established, and that's my relationship with him when it comes to faith. But even people like CJ and Busy, like when Jess and I talk to them, they're more like we can talk to them about maybe life decisions and things like that, and they can always challenge us and, hey, have you thought about it this way or whatever. And for me, like, I'm pushed most through relationship, and that is one way to look at discipline, whereas some people will look at, I need to read the Bible at 9 a.m. every day or whatever. For me, I can grow in faith when I'm challenged by people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's a little risk in there that you're kind of opening yourself up to vulnerability, because when you want to have life discussions about decisions, if someone disagrees with you or doesn't necessarily think what you're saying is right, like, there's a trust factor in there, but also back to what we were saying before, the purpose of that is to grow. So you can't just surround yourself with people who think like you or agree with you.
Yeah.
I think what you're saying is like people that are going to challenge you
Yeah.
as well.
And also, like, I also have relational equity with those people. Like, I have 3 years of friendship with those people, and I trust those people too.
Sure.
So if I were to give the same, allow someone I just met to have the same input into my life as I do with them, I'd probably be making a mistake. You know, I'd be putting way too much trust in someone, and it probably would end up hurting me or them. You know,
Yeah.
so
That's one of the reasons I think we love, even though we're not meeting physically, we still get to have our groups
Yeah.
because even if you're not having an incredibly deep, powerful spiritual discussion, you're still building relational equity with people that you can trust and leaders that you can trust and peers that you
Yep.
can trust. But the cool part of that is, and like this happens a lot of times, like at our winter retreat, and sometimes we do a series like this. Well, we'll do like a Q&A session like this, where we'll pop up some stools and we'll just do some questions. And it's crazy, like to sit in our seats and watch the facial expressions, like, oh, I never thought about that.
yeah, yeah,
Or like, there's that side of spiritual growth where I'm praying and I felt like God was putting something on my heart and I didn't really understand it. So I could have asked questions, but instead I just stopped. Or I'm reading my Bible and I came along to this point and a question popped into my mind and why aren't there last names in the Bible? And I couldn't get past it. And like,
it's always of
yeah,
somewhere.
Yeah,
That's
right.
your last name.
Or James the Lesser. That's my new favorite. Like,
gosh,
that's a terrible
Poor
name.
guy.
Dave the
Not
Wimp.
the greater.
Dave the Pansy. But there's this idea like we love questions and questions help us grow in our faith. And that, one of the reasons that groups are such a pivotal part of our faith growth is that you have the relational equity like Dave talked about to say, you know what, I came across this question, or
Yeah.
you ask a question that makes me think about other questions in my faith that have maybe been a stumbling block or a pausing block for me, and it causes me to dig in more. So I would even encourage, like in this time where you're having like, maybe too much free time, maybe you've got other things to prioritize, or maybe you're just bored and you don't want to log on, like be intentional about logging on with your group and like just build that relational equity, build those trust relationships, listen to the questions that are being asked, and maybe those prompt some questions that have been a pause for you.
Yeah.
So we've been on for 18 minutes or so. Any final thoughts before we log off?
My final thought is, I realize that there are some of us who might be someone across this video and you're not connected yet. We want to help connect you. We realize that there's a lot of folks who have walked through the doors into 912 that have not connected to a group. And I know we've kind of talked about it 2 or 3 times, but it really is a great place in this season, really ever, but to connect with people and to be challenged and to be intentional about growing. So if you're not connected and you want to get connected, please let us know because we want to help make sure that can happen for you. Most of our groups are meeting on Sunday nights around 6. Some of them are 7, kind of like our normal 912 service. So we want to be able to help you find a way to digitally connect in this season. So that's my final thought.
Good.
I don't have anything.
So my final thought, thanks Dave. My final thought would be this, when I was new in my faith, I had this idea that the further I got, the more mature I got in my faith, the less and less Jesus I would need for salvation, for life, for all these things.
Yeah.
And come to realize, like, the more mature I get in my faith, the more obvious and oblivious I've been to I need more and more of Jesus' guidance, Jesus' help, Jesus' grace, Jesus' mercy, all these things. And I think that kind of the same thing happens along the lines of I should think the more mature I get in my faith, the less questions that I have. And that's the opposite. Like, the more mature I've got in my faith,
Yeah.
the whole new doors of questions that I've opened. So I would offer you this, like whether it's a text message to one of us, whether it's a text message to your small group leader, if you don't have a group leader and you want to send us a direct message on the Instagram, like there's no such thing as a bad question when it comes to faith.
Yep.
Like this is a great dialogue and conversation we could have. So I would challenge you, like if you're in the middle of the night and you've got a question that pops up, send an Instagram direct message. Like we'll get back to you as quick as we can and we'll help you out, try to figure that out. We'll help you try to process and understand it. So it's not just, you and us giving you the answers. We want to help you figure out the answers on your own. So
Yep.
ask questions. Like there's no bad question here except the one you don't ask.
Exactly. All right, guys. Well, we hope you have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.
See ya.